The meeting was at 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. I remember the time specifically because I had been watching the clock since 11, which is when I noticed that Sandra, my manager, had blocked out 2 hours in her calendar under a subject line she had titled Resource Review. She had not invited me to that meeting. She had not mentioned it to me, but I had access to the shared team calendar, and I could see that the only people she had invited were herself, the head of HR, and someone from the legal department whose name I had never seen before. I want to be clear about what I knew at that point. I did not know for certain that the meeting was about me. What I knew was that Sandra had been building towards something for 6 months, that I had been quietly building towards something of my own for 4, and that a 2-hour block with HR and legal on a Thursday afternoon felt like a conclusion rather than a coincidence. At 5 minutes to 2, she appeared at my desk. She had the specific expression of someone performing a version of kindness they don't actually feel. Eyebrows slightly raised, head tilted just enough to suggest concern, the kind of face people make when they've rehearsed it. She said, "Do you have a moment? There are some people who would like to speak with you." I picked up my notebook. She said, "You won't need that." I brought it anyway. There were 3 people in the room. Sandra, a woman from HR named Carol who I had spoken to exactly once before, and the legal person, who introduced himself as an external consultant and did not look at me when he said it. They sat on one side of the table. I sat on the other. There was a document in front of Sandra's place. She did not touch it for the first 4 minutes. I am going to tell you what was in that room in that meeting, and then I am going to tell you what was in my notebook. Because one of those things ended Sandra's career. It was not the document in front of her. I need to go back about 18 months to make sense of what I am going to tell you. I had been working at the company for 3 years when Sandra arrived. Before her, I had a manager named Patrick, who was disorganized in the specific harmless way that some people in management are disorganized. He forgot things, rescheduled things, occasionally took credit for things in the small unconscious way that people do when they are not paying attention to whether something was theirs. I was not in love with working for Patrick, but I understood him. He was predictable. Predictable I can work with. Sandra was different from her first week. She arrived in the way that certain people arrive in new jobs, with the specific energy of someone who had decided before they walked through the door exactly who they were going to be and exactly who was going to be a problem. Within 10 days, she had reorganized the team's reporting structure so that the 2 most senior members of the team reported directly to her director instead of through her. I watched her do this, and I thought it was strange, but I said nothing because it was her team to structure. Within 3 weeks, she had her first conversation with me about my communication style. I had sent an email to a client without copying her. The email was completely within the scope of my role. I had been sending emails to that client independently for 2 years. She described it to me as going around her, and said she expected to be included on all external communication going forward. I agreed. I updated my process. I copied her on everything. The thing is, I am someone who pays attention. Not in a paranoid way, in the specific, quiet way that some people are built to notice the texture of situations. And what I noticed in the weeks after that first conversation was that Sandra had a pattern. It was not random, it was not mood-based, it was something more deliberate and more consistent than either of those things. She would assign work without written confirmation, verbally, in passing, in ways that left no record of the instruction. Then when the work was not completed to her satisfaction, the absence of the record became my problem. I had not documented the brief correctly. I had misunderstood the requirement. There was nothing in writing to suggest otherwise. She would copy senior stakeholders into emails about team performance, emails that were carefully worded to be readable as praise, while also being readable, if you knew what you were looking for, as a documented record of deficiencies in specific team members. I received 3 of these in my first 2 months under her management. Each one was complimentary on its surface. Each one contained a sentence that, taken in isolation, could have described a performance issue. I noticed this in month 2. I did nothing about it in month 2. What I did was start keeping a record of my own. It was not dramatic. It was a folder on my personal laptop, not my work laptop, that I updated every evening before I closed it. Dates, what was said, by whom, in what context, whether there was written confirmation or only a verbal instruction, who was present, what the outcome was described as afterward. I am going to come back to that folder, because that folder is the reason we are here. I need to stop here for a second, because what I found in month 4 is the thing that changed everything, and I want to make sure I describe it with enough precision that you understand exactly what I am talking about, because it sounds almost too simple when I say it out loud. I found out that Sandra had been building a performance file on me, not in the formal HR sense, not an official performance improvement plan, not a documented warning, something more informal and more dangerous than that. A running document, maintained in her personal drive on the shared server that she had apparently been adding to since her second week in the role. I found it by accident. She had shared a folder with the team that contained some project templates, and one of the documents in that folder had been linked from another document in her personal drive. A linking error. The kind that happens when you move files around without checking what is connected to what. The link was not supposed to be visible. The document it opened was not supposed to be accessible. I opened it before I understood what it was. It was a log. Dates going back to her 3rd week. Notes against my name and against 2 other team members, describing interactions, observations, performance concerns. The language was careful. The kind of careful that someone uses when they are writing with the eventual intention of showing it to someone else. I sat at my desk and I read 37 entries. 37 entries spanning 4 months. The most recent was from the previous Friday. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, and I want to be honest that it was not fear. I had been anticipating something like this for long enough that what I actually felt was something closer to the specific calm of a person who has just had a suspicion confirmed. The situation was not more dangerous than I had thought. It was exactly as dangerous as I had thought. Knowing the exact shape of it made it smaller, not larger. I closed the document. I did not tell Sandra I had seen it. I did not do anything that afternoon that was different from what I would have done if I had not seen it. I went home. I opened my personal folder. I added an entry dated that day, found log, 37 entries, screenshot saved, and then I added 3 words underneath. Now we start. I want to be very precise about what the next 4 months looked like from the outside and what they looked like from the inside, because the gap between those 2 things is where everything that matters happened. From the outside, I was a cooperative, professional, slightly quiet team member who responded promptly to emails, met my deadlines, copied Sandra on all external communication, and attended every meeting she scheduled. I did not complain. I did not confide in colleagues. I did not behave in any way that a person watching would describe as different from the version of me that had been there for 3 years before Sandra arrived. From the inside, I was working the most deliberate 4 months of my professional life. Here is what I did, and here is the order I did it in. The first thing, the week after I found the log, was find an employment solicitor, not to take any action, to understand what was happening to me from a legal standpoint before I decided what to do about it. I want to say this clearly, because I think it matters. I paid for 1 hour of that solicitor's time out of my own pocket, and that hour was the most valuable professional investment I have ever made. She told me 3 things that changed how I understood my situation. She told me that what Sandra was doing, building an undisclosed personal log of performance concerns without going through the formal HR process, was itself a potential procedural violation of the company's own documented management policy. It bypassed the formal performance improvement framework that the company's HR guidelines required for any managed performance process. She told me that if I was going to make a formal complaint, the strength of it would depend entirely on documentation, not recollection, not the impressions of colleagues, paper, emails, messages, dates and times, specific language used, everything in writing. She told me to say nothing to Sandra, nothing to HR, nothing to colleagues who might inadvertently say something to someone, and to continue doing my job at full capacity, because any deterioration in my work performance during this period would be used against me, and I could not give Sandra anything legitimate to add to her log. I walked out of that appointment, and I sat in my car in the solicitor's car park for a few minutes. Then I drove back to the office and I sent 3 emails, all within normal working scope, all copied to Sandra, all time-stamped before end of business. I was not going to give her a single thing. The second thing I did was audit my own email history going back 18 months. Every email, every instruction given verbally that I had subsequently confirmed in writing because I had learned to do that. Every response I had sent that demonstrated the standard of my work. Every project delivered, every client communication, every piece of evidence that my performance had been, by any reasonable documented measure, consistently good. I found 340 emails across 18 months that were relevant to the picture I was building. I exported them. I saved them to my personal machine. Not all 340 were useful, but I needed to know what I had before I decided what to use. The third thing was the hardest, and the one that took the most self-control. Sandra had a habit, I had noticed it from month 2, of delivering instructions for significant pieces of work verbally, in informal settings, with no written follow-up. A corridor conversation, a comment at the end of a team meeting when most people were already packing up, a comment made casually while looking at her phone so that the instruction felt like a minor thing rather than a formally delegated piece of work. I had started, from month 2, confirming every one of these instructions in writing afterward, an email sent within the hour, just to confirm what we discussed. I will be doing this, by this date, to this standard, copying her, time-stamped. She had never once corrected one of those confirmation emails, not one, which meant that 23 confirmed written instructions existed, 23 pieces of work she had assigned verbally, and I had documented in a form she had tacitly approved, against which I could now trace the outcomes she had subsequently described as deficient in her log. I printed all 23. I put them in a physical folder, not at work, at home, with the corresponding entries from her log cross-referenced against each one. The gap between what she had written in the log and what the paper trail actually showed was not small. It was not a matter of interpretation or professional judgment. It was the kind of gap that exists when someone is writing one version of events for a specific future audience and hoping the other version does not have a witness. I had been the witness the whole time. I just hadn't known how to say so until I understood the full shape of what was being built against me. I need to tell you about the thing that happened in month 3 of the 4 months, because it changed the scale of what I submitted. I was not the only one. There were 2 other people Sandra had been logging. I had seen their names in the document when I found it. I had said nothing to either of them, but in month 3, one of them, I'll call her Priya, came to me. Not about Sandra's log. She didn't know about it. She came to me because she was planning to resign, and she wanted to know if I had noticed anything during my time with the team that might support a formal complaint she was considering making before she left. I want to be careful about what I say here, because Priya's situation was hers, and the details of it are not mine to share in full. What I can tell you is what I said to her. I told her that before she resigned, I thought she should speak to an employment solicitor. I told her I had done so myself, and that the conversation had been useful in ways I hadn't anticipated. I did not tell her what I had found. I did not show her the folder. I said only that if she was considering a formal complaint, she should understand her legal position first. She came back to me 3 weeks later. She had spoken to a solicitor. She had begun her own documentation process, and she told me that the third person Sandra had been managing out, a quiet, experienced analyst named Marcus, who had been with the company for 7 years, had been doing the same thing independently since month 2. 3 people, 3 separate logs, 3 separate patterns, all pointed in the same direction. We did not form a group. We did not coordinate our submissions. We did not share documentation. Our solicitors, separately, advised against it, because a coordinated submission could be characterized as a grievance campaign rather than 3 independent complaints, which would have complicated how HR was required to process them. What we did was agree on a date. I want to take you back to that Thursday afternoon, the 2 o'clock meeting with HR and legal, and Sandra and her document she wasn't touching. Here is what was in that room. Sandra had prepared a 3-page summary of performance concerns, vague, carefully worded, drawing on 6 months of her login language that had been processed by legal to be specific enough to sound credible and general enough to be difficult to refute. The external legal consultant was there to ensure the termination, if that was where the meeting went, was handled in a way that minimized the company's exposure. Carol from HR had a script. I could tell because she was following it too closely, and there was a pause of exactly the same length before each section that people have when they are reading rather than speaking naturally. Sandra had a smile that she had been practicing. I had seen her practice it before. The specific, slightly tilted, slightly softened expression she used when she was about to deliver something she expected to land badly and wanted to preempt any response by appearing compassionate. Here is what I had. I had a notebook containing my personal log, 18 months of entries, 47 pages, indexed by date. I had printed copies of 23 email confirmations of verbally assigned work with Sandra's tacit written approval. I had a 12-page document, prepared with my solicitor, summarizing the discrepancy between the 37 entries in Sandra's log and what the email trail actually demonstrated. I had a formal grievance letter, pre-written, signed and dated, ready to be submitted the moment this meeting concluded. And I had a text from Priya, sent at 1:58 p.m., that said, "Submitted, good luck," and one from Marcus, sent at 1:59 p.m., that said, "Done." Carol got through approximately 4 minutes of her script before she paused, in the way that people pause when they have arrived at the difficult part. She said, "We wanted to speak with you today about some concerns that have been raised regarding your performance over the past several months." I said, "I understand. Before we continue, I would like to inform you that I have a formal grievance to submit. I believe that what you are about to describe to me is part of a pattern of conduct by my manager that I have been documenting for 4 months, and that 2 other members of the team have independently documented and submitted formal grievances about as of this afternoon." The legal consultant looked up from his notes. It was the first time he had made eye contact with me. Sandra stopped smiling. I put my grievance letter on the table. I put the 12-page summary next to it. I put the printed email confirmations in a stack to the left. I put my 47-page indexed log in front of me, and I put my hand flat on it. I said, "I have kept a full record. I am happy to walk through it if that would be helpful." Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Carol said, "I think we may need to reschedule this meeting." The external legal consultant was already writing something on his pad. I could not read what it was. I did not need to. I thanked them for their time. I left my grievance letter on the table. I picked up my notebook and I walked out. Let me tell you what happened in the 4 weeks after that Thursday. HR opened a formal investigation the following Monday, not into my performance, into the conduct of my manager. The investigation was conducted by an external HR consultancy, not internal HR, because Carol's involvement in the original Thursday meeting created a conflict that required the process to go outside. Sandra was placed on administrative leave during the investigation. This was announced to the team on the Tuesday morning in an email from her director, which described it as a temporary administrative matter and did not use her name. The team knew. Everyone who works in an office knows what a temporary administrative matter means when it comes with a sudden absence. The investigation took 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, I was interviewed twice, once by the external HR consultant and once by a second consultant who I understood to be working specifically on the legal exposure assessment. I submitted everything I had, every email, every log entry, every cross-reference discrepancy between Sandra's log and the documented record. Priya was interviewed. Marcus was interviewed. Two other team members who had not formally complained were interviewed as witnesses and provided accounts that were consistent with what the three of us had documented. On a Wednesday morning, 4 weeks after the Thursday meeting, I received a call from the external HR consultant. She told me that the investigation had concluded. She told me that my formal grievance had been upheld in full. She told me that the company had identified significant procedural violations in the management conduct I had described, and that appropriate action had been taken. She did not tell me what that action was. She was not required to. I found out through a company-wide email sent the following Monday from the director's director, which announced that Sandra would not be returning to her role. The email used the language that companies use in these situations: a decision made mutually, a transition managed professionally, a wish for her future success. The kind of language that says nothing and means everything to anyone who knows what they are reading. I know what I am reading. She was terminated. The external legal consultant the company had brought in to manage my dismissal ended up managing hers instead. I have thought about the specific irony of that many times since, and I am not going to pretend I don't find it satisfying. Priya did not resign. She is still with the company. She was given a formal acknowledgement of the impact the situation had on her work environment, and a restructuring of her role that removed the management reporting line that had been the source of the problem. Marcus was offered a settlement, not because his case was weak, but because 7 years of service and the specific nature of what had been done to him created an exposure for the company that they preferred to resolve financially. He accepted it. He left the company. He told me, the last time I spoke to him, that he did not regret leaving and that the settlement had given him the time to do something he had been planning for years. I will not tell you what that is, because it is his story and not mine. But I will tell you that he sounded more settled than he had in the 2 years I had known him. I was offered a meeting with Sandra's director, at my request, to discuss my own position within the team and the company's approach to rebuilding the team environment following the investigation. That meeting was productive, in the specific way that meetings are productive when both sides understand exactly what the other side is holding. I am still at the company. I have a different manager now, someone who was promoted internally and who I have known for 2 years. I like her. She is disorganized in the specific harmless way that some people in management are disorganized, and I find it restful after what preceded it. My personal folder still exists. I still update it, not because I expect to need it, but because the person I became over those 4 months is someone who understands that documentation is not paranoia. It is the specific, quiet act of making sure that your version of events has a witness, even when the only witness available is you. There is something I want to say about the notebook. After the Thursday meeting, after I walked out of that room and went back to my desk, I sat for a moment before I did anything else. The office was quiet in the way offices are quiet when something has just happened that nobody has been officially told about yet, but that everyone can feel in the air. People were at their desks. Keyboards were clicking. Someone was on a call in the glass-walled meeting room to the left. Completely ordinary. I put the notebook in my bag. I straightened a few things on my desk. I got a glass of water from the kitchen, and I sat back down and finished the piece of work I had been halfway through before Sandra appeared at my desk at 5 minutes to 2. I finished it because it was mine, because it was good work, because the version of me that had been doing good work for 3 years before Sandra arrived had not changed, and was not going to change because someone had decided to spend 6 months writing a different version of that work in a document she thought no one would ever see. That is the thing I come back to most. Not the meeting, not the investigation, not the outcome, satisfying as it was. The thing I come back to is the 4 months when I was the only person in the room who knew what I was holding. There is a particular kind of stillness that comes from having the evidence and choosing not to use it until exactly the right moment. It is not comfortable, that stillness. It asks a lot of you. It requires you to smile at someone across a meeting table while carrying something they don't know you're carrying. It requires a very long game and a very settled sense of who you are and what you are actually doing in the space between the injustice and the response. But it is the most effective thing I have ever done. And the reason it worked is simple. Sandra spent 6 months building a case against me. What she did not understand was that every step of that process, every log entry, every verbal instruction, every email, every meeting, was a step she was building a case against herself. She handed me the evidence. She just didn't know she was doing it. That is KarmaFiled, the patience, the folder, the notebook on the table when she said, "You won't need that." Leave me a comment with one word if you made it to the end. Notebook. And if this hits somewhere that you recognize, because a lot of you have sat in that office with something you were not ready to use yet, subscribe and hit the bell. I will see you in the next video.